Never quite sure when I'm live. Am I live? Am I here? Are we doing this? Tuesday night? Pretty exciting. Tuesday night. We're here. 7 p.m. Central Time. Central Time. Very important distinction. Welcome to another Ask Farmer Hayseed. I was gone last week because I was just torn up by allergies. I couldn't stop sneezing. It would not have been a good show. This week I'm kind of under the weather too. I don't know. I don't know if it's seasonal or if allergies, whatever. But I'm going for it. I'm going for this. It's nice to see everyone, and by everyone I mean whoever's out there, and whoever watches later. I'm really thinking a lot about going to a podcast format because that seems like it might be a little more accessible. Maybe have take questions during the week. Because right now I really do it live to get questions as it's happening, so I can answer your questions. But I think more people like to consume the show with podcast style, or even not even watch, just listen. So I'm thinking about that. Maybe Ricky can help me with that. There's Ricky. There's Mark. Mark, finally, my buddy's buddy from the West Coast is tuning in. Nice to see him. He may or may not have some genetics that I tossed some pollen out and created going right now. So very exciting. Yeah, Ricky, nice to see you too, sir. Wow. So I got some things to talk about tonight. Of course, I'm going to get up on my soapbox and rail about things because that's kind of how I do. I guess the very first thing I beat this horse before. Is it dead yet? I don't know. I better beat it a little more to make sure. I'm talking about lineage and correct nomenclature of lineage, and that's going to lead into breeding. But the first thing to know about lineage is when you talk about a cross, you always say the female first. This is just standard biology nomenclature. That's my word of the week, nomenclature. I should have like a little graphic or whatever. But you always say the female first and the male second. And I try and wish more people would do it when they come up with a name, to make the name, if it's two words, to have the first word relate to the female and the second word relate to the male. And this is also, we can know things when we look at the names of these crosses that people are making. And the more people that grow, the more people are going to cross, because it's not that hard to make seeds. Pollen chucking's easy, believe me. I've done it. I guess one thing, there's a difference between a pollen chucker and a breeder. And the essential difference between pollen chuckers and breeders are pollen chuckers are people like me who took some hopefully good herb, good tested, proven clones of females, and crossed those with a male or males from high quality genetics, and created seeds, and then they grow the seeds. And they give them to their friends, or they give them to other people. And this is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to pollen chuck. It's just that we need to make sure that we separate that or differentiate that from actual breeders. Pollen chucking, cannabis is amazing the way it combines, the way it does, combines genetics. If you use a proven clone and a male from a solid genetic line and cross those, you're probably going to come up with some pretty good seeds. It's kind of hard not to, as long as there's not something super weird like hermaphrodism, or maybe extra susceptibility to diseases or whatever. But how would you know? You just crossed two plants and went for it. So that's what I've done. That's my Lost in Space, and also my bag seed project, or a couple lines that I've started. I would love to actually get into real breeding. Real breeding means you run trials on the seeds you create. You test your males, and by doing all this stuff, you can figure out. You can kind of figure out what you're actually doing. Real breeders breed for like actual traits. They cross things. They select for the traits. They back cross. They cross. They back cross. And another thing real breeders do is they take a male. They make crosses out of the male. They keep clones of that male or males. They might do 3 different rooms of 3 different males. They run the seeds from those crosses, see how those seeds came out, and then you can start to get a picture of the quality of the male. That's actual breeding. Some of them even do the I want to say punat, or I don't want to say punny. Are they punny squares? God, I'm dropping the ball. But you do the square with the male and the female, and you figure out how the recessive genes work out, and when you're breeding for a specific trait. That's the kind of thing that breeders do. And so I just want to make sure that we're not calling people that toss a male in a room and just make seeds. That's not a breeder. It could be a seed line. You can definitely call it a seed line, but it's not done by a breeder. It's not a bred seed line. It's a cross seed line or a made seed line. And this might seem like kind of like a distinction that isn't important, but it is to people that care about it. So Ricky's talking about a November podcast kickoff. That'd be pretty good. November's my birthday. November's when I get off probation. So that might be a good time to get into that. Okay, yes, I will. I will. I'm going to write that on my pad here, Ricky. So that's just what I wanted to say about that stuff. You always say the female first and then the male when you say a cross. And that there are pollen chuckers or people who make seeds, and there are breeders who breed seeds. There's a difference. And so getting into breeding a little bit, I guess I talked a little bit about it, but definitely want to talk about why seeds cost so much. And, some people get lucky by having a really good female, and they can cross any male to it, and it'll have amazing stuff come out of it. Or some people selected a male from really good seeds, and everything that male touches, it really, really ups the quality. And so they can sell their seeds for quite a bit. Some people put a lot of time and effort, years into lines to develop them and make sure that they're solid. And all these things are worth money, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your point of view. If you're an artist, you deserve money for what you create. And I think the same thing is for people who create seeds. So if you say it's like $200 for a pack of 12 seeds, it's like, that's a lot of money. But if you get one keeper clone out of that $200 pack and you grow it over and over and over, and it's top quality, you make your money back many times over. On the other hand, there are some people that sell $700 packs of seeds that are literally just pollen chucking them. No names, but there's some sort of big hype names. So that's kind of what they do, and they charge like $700. They do some selection. They're like, oh, this female is the one I want. I'm going to cross it to this, but $700 is a lot. You better have some real fire if you're charging that much. But $100 to $200 for a pack of seeds isn't a lot if you're going to get good quality genetics out of there. So that's kind of my feeling about that. Hey, Ricky, stop muddying the waters. You can't say pollen chucker breeder. You're either a pollen chucker or a breeder. You're a seed maker and a pollen chucker, or you're someone who breeds lines. I mean, come on, man. You're just confusing these things. But I am too. I'm a pollen chucker. That's how we did it from back in the early 90s to when we could start getting seeds in the mid 2000s. And now you can get all kinds of seeds. Around here, ethos is real big. I don't think ethos is my favorite, mainly just because there's some actual ethical questions about the company's owner, which is really ironic given the name of the company, but it's always projection, right? I've repped it before, but Dynasty Genetics is one of my favorite. He's not hype. Professor P's the guy's name. He doesn't make hype strains. He makes strains that are proven to have medicinal and recreational qualities that are highly sought after. They're gorgeous. He gets just amazing colored plants. His birds of paradise is pinks and purples and yellows and greens, and it's just beautiful. He's one of my favorite because he isn't the hype guy that you hear about, and I want people to know about Dynasty because of that. He also has relic seeds. There's Bodhi, which is not green Bodhi. It's Bodhi is called Plant More Seeds. And I've said this before, but I want to make sure you guys are aware of these breeders. This guy's been to India, been to the Himalayas, hung out with the swamis or whatever. I'm not sure what they're called. I mean, it's some of his pictures are insane, and gotten true mountain heirloom hash strains, and he's brought those back and breeds with those. So Plant More Seeds or Bodhi is another one of my favorites for those reasons. So I'm always going to rep those two guys because people don't really know about them, and they're just like, oh, I haven't heard about them. They're not. I've heard of ethos. It's like, yeah, but there's a reason. These guys are breeders. These guys are the people that know. And so that's what's going on with that. I'm always going to rep those guys. I want to shift gears for a second. We were talking about a couple weeks ago. We were talking about popping seeds, and I mentioned that my friend from Crybaby Genetics was talking about gibberellic acid. GA is it's called, and he verified that was what he was talking about for a seed soak for old seeds, and that the product is called GA3, gibberellic acid 3, which is the product that he recommends for soaking seeds. So I haven't gotten proportions or how you mix that or whatever from him, but I know that is the stuff. And what reminded me of him is by saying a breeder's breeder. This guy is he's just top shelf and incredibly intelligent, and no one knows about him because only a few people have his seeds, because he's not interested in selling a lot of seeds. He's interested in making the weirdest, coolest, most unique plants possible. So gibberellic acid, GA3, that's the deal with that. Yeah, well, here we are on the live show. Yeah, I think we're going to do a podcast. I listen to podcasts all the time. I drive to Kansas City, which is an hour or so away. You guys might know that. I live in Topeka. I kind of actually cherish that time because I get to listen to all these really incredibly knowledgeable and informed people talk about stuff. One thing I listened to this weekend was a episode of Shaping Fire. This guy Shango Los has a podcast. He's out in Vashon Island, out in Washington State. He's a focus on organics, and he has fantastic guests on his show. And one of them is Suzanne Wainwright Evans, otherwise known as the Bug Lady. And she's a fascinating lady. Then they have a podcast that's like an hour and 40 minutes long, where they just chat about bugs and the idea of banker plants. And so this is kind of fascinating to me. Banker plants are plants that you pre-charge or essentially populate with predator insects, but you can also, if you're really on top of your game, you can charge these with, say, like aphids, but aphids that don't infect cannabis. And so that's one thing. The pests for cannabis tend to be pretty specific. There's a few generalists that come along. Thrips, I think, are one of them, are pretty general. They'll attack all sorts of things, but the aphids that feed on cannabis are completely different than the aphids that feed on, say, barley or peppers. Different aphids, completely different aphids. So if you have those, if you have like one of the ways they encourage barley predator or aphid predators is to get the kind of aphids that live on barley, and they even grow barley in like rock wool cubes and pre-charge it with these aphids, and then you pour the aphid predators on there and you space those out throughout your crop, and they can eat and then they'll move over to your cannabis and eat the aphids that grow there. The other alyssum is a really sweet smelling flower, and it is a fantastic environment for minute pirate bugs, which are called aureus. And they have, but the thing about these minute pirate bugs is part of their diet is pollen. Pollen is a protein. So, carnivores will eat pollen because it's essentially like, I don't know, cereal to them or something. And so these aureus will, and they also eat nectar. They feed on the nectar too. So they eat the nectar and the pollen from the alyssum plants that you've planted and pre-charged with these aureus, minute pirate bugs, and then they come and feed on thrips and whiteflies, and they'll work on the mites too. So this is great for outdoors. This is kind of a little more for outdoors. Indoors, I'm not sure I would have a bunch of alyssum, but maybe. Just the idea of banker plants is really fascinating to me. That there's this idea that you can use pests that don't attack cannabis to feed the predators that then can spread over to your cannabis and deal with that. She also brought up the idea that marigolds in their present form are worthless, and in fact they're worse than worthless. They are actually vectors to that bring plants into your, or bring pests into your environment, bring diseases into your environment, because the marigolds that the legend says that marigolds deter insects, that is like essentially a wives' tale, or not really a wives' tale, but it was from 50, 100 years ago. There was marigolds that were much different than the marigolds we see today. We've bred marigolds for flash and show. These marigolds were much more like, I forgot the name. I forgot the name of the flower. It'll come to me in a minute. I'm thinking cholera or Coachella. I know. It's in there. So don't plant marigolds and expect them to get rid of plants. And in fact, the foliage is fed upon by all kinds of pests, so it's not a good garden deterrent of plants. So I mean of pests. Just interesting stuff. I'm always trying to learn more. I'm always trying to listen to the experts and figure out what they have to say, so I have a clue. Because it's hard. There's a lot to know about cannabis. It's a giant world, and one of those things. Triploid genetics are kind of the future of especially outdoor cannabis. So it's a little bit complex, but essentially they take seeds and they hit them with a harsh chemical that forces the seeds to double their genetic information. So this is not GMO because instead of, they're not adding or subtracting any genes, they are doubling the genes that exist. So they go from what is called diploid to tetraploid, and tetraploid means four. They've got four. They've got two of each gene, XXYY. And then when you cross a diploid with a tetraploid, you get a triploid. And a triploid has either two copies from one plant and one from the other, or two from the other plant and one from that. It's a little bit complex, but what we have then is, hi guys, hi Rachel, hi Stephen. What we have then is a plant that is sterile, and because it is sterile, all of its genetic information is pointed towards it producing. Instead of producing seeds, it produces more external metabolites. It produces bigger flowers. It has more resistance to pests. It has more resistant to vectors like viruses and bacteria. And so you have a sterile super plant essentially when you do this. So I am, I really try to do things organically. I really try to do things regeneratively. But to me, if you can use a small amount of a harsh chemical on a seed and breed that out and produce something that takes less pesticide, takes less care, takes less fungicides and all that sort of thing, then maybe it's worth it. And the other thing is, as we see legalization move forward, we're going to see industrial hemp come on real strong. And so they're going to be making rope out of it. They're going to be making seeds out of it. They're going to be planting giant crops of mixed males and females. And these crops are going to basically create seeds all over. If you're growing outdoors and you don't have some kind of HEPA scrubber on your greenhouse and some air gets in, then you are going to get seeds in your crop from industrial hemp, which means the seeds will be essentially useless to you, even if they weren't taking half of your weight away from you. So we do need a solid way to create sterile plants that we can grow from seed, and this triploid process is the way to do it. So quite complex, I understand. But that's one of the latest episodes of Shaping Fire. I listened to all the Kiss Organics podcasts twice because I liked them so much. Now I'm kind of on to Shaping Fire because, again, emphasis on organics, but also some of the more cutting edge things happening um, uh, in cannabis in general. So I would suggest that. First, I suggest Kiss Organics. Um, what's it called? Science of Cannabis, I believe, and then Shaping Fire with Shango Los. He takes a little getting used to. He's kind of a goofy guy, but honestly, he's the knowledge he brings is pretty killer. So that's triploid genetics. Triploid hops. Hops are very closely related um, to cannabis, and triploid hops produce twice as many external metaboloids and metaboloids. What the hell is that? Metabolites. So the triploids produced by that process I just mentioned of hops and hops essentially have trichomes, and those trichomes have oils in them. They produce twice as much as the other regular diploid uh, hops. So if we can get that kind of production out of cannabis, we are off to the races. That is amazing. And in a sterile plant, you could still clone them. You could still start 20 seeds and see which one's the best and clone it in the same pheno-hunting situation that I've talked about before. But you could also plant 1,000 or 100,000 seeds in a field and not have to worry about your neighbor's hemp farm polluting it all. So kind of excited about that. Let's see. We got anything else? Nope. No questions. Come on, guys, bring the questions. I'm always excited about questions. So let's see here. We're also gonna. I don't know. I guess that covers the things that we were talking about. Foliar feeding. My friend here, Mark Pete. Why did I say Matt Pete? Mark Pete out on the West Coast wanted to know a little bit about foliar feeding. Foliar feeding, I think, is kind of an amazing thing. The plants can pull nutrients straight in through their leaves, and they can. It's kind of amazing if you spray the plants down, and all of a sudden they're just greener, they're prettier, they're healthier because there's something about the direct injection of the nutrients to the leaves through the stomata instead of through the roots, and also everything that drips off of the foliage goes right to the soil. So foliar feeding is something I highly suggest. I don't highly suggest foliar feeding things that you're not 100% sure of, and that would include compost tea. I know some people are like, "Oh, you spray everything with compost tea and you're going to be fine." I don't know. Compost tea is complex. I think it's great for soil. I've heard some mixed information about whether or not it can cause problems down the line by encouraging microbes on the leaves that you don't necessarily want there. So compost is from the ground, and I would suggest you put it back in the ground. Some people have a lot of success spraying compost tea against things like powdery mildew and stuff, and this all depends on the source of your compost. If your compost pile hasn't gotten like 130, 140 degrees inside, I think up to 160 degrees is where compost tea gets to, then I'm not sure you necessarily want to use that. But if you're not afraid of using ionic nutrients like salt-based nutrients, those work very well as foliar feed. But I would cut to a quarter the recommended dose. Don't full strength foliar feed ionic nutrients on the plants. I think it's either wasting it or you're going to burn the leaves a little bit. As far as labs is something you could foliar feed because labs is such a strong microbe that it outcompetes everything in it. But I would only spray fresh labs. and labs is lactoacidophilus bacillus serum. It is essentially milk extract. It's the lactic acid bacteria from milk, and it's has some very strong. Basically, it colonizes the plant and excludes other microbes from getting established because it colonizes the plant. Um, Other things you might want to, I think kelp is liquid kelp, or even the dried kelp that you mix up into water. Kelp is one of the best things you can foliar feed. It's a potassium blast, right, and some micronutrients right to the plant. There has been some talk about certain kinds of kelp having high heavy metal content, though. I mean, there's always a but, right? And so that's something that I would be concerned about if I was doing commercial farming. If you're doing it at home, you're not spraying a lot of it, I wouldn't worry about it. You're not testing parts per million of arsenic or whatever, or lead, or you wouldn't want it there. But if you're not spraying a lot of it, I don't think it's going to accumulate that much. I think you'd have to worry more if you put a bunch of kelp in your soil, did a lot of foliar feeding with it. Another one I have gotten, you take frass and you mix it up in water and strain it out and spray that on the plants, because frass is like 222 often, somewhere around there, 2N, 2P, 2K. I know calcium carbonate is a way that the plant can pull calcium immediately into its structure, and calcium's the most important nutrient next to nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, because it facilitates cell structure and nutrient delivery. So those are some things I would look into. Potassium carbonate is something called green cure. That's another one that the plant immediately looks happy after you use it. But if you use it in flowering, you're going to singe the pistils, the hairs, and then it makes it a little. It's just a little funky when you're at 5 weeks and all your pistils are red. It's a little weird, because I like to use that as one of the ways how far along your plant is. And I've said it before. I'm not a huge fan of using the trichomes only as judging ripeness, because there's a lot of factors: wind, stress, anything touching it, light intensity, temperature. All these things can affect the trichomes in one area or another. There's all kinds of microclimates all over the plant, generally, unless you're really, really good at getting every single part of the plant the same with the same amount of light, and that's pretty rare. So pistils are one way I do it. It's the one negative thing about potassium carbonate is it burns the pistils. So that is what it is. Since we're not trying to grow seeds, it's not that there's not a big consequence to it. But those are some of the things. Some of the things I would suggest for foliar feeding. So Joel Clark has a question. Hello. Thoughts on using CO2 in small tent grow? Is it worth it? Do you see results in a typical small home grow? CO2 plants breathe CO2, and it's kind of amazing because carbon is the basic building block of all living things, and plants pull carbon and oxygen in through their stomata. They breathe it in, and then they split that oxygen out, and they're left with a block of carbon or an atom of carbon, or however you want to put it. So CO2 rates are important. I have done CO2 in small tents. The only thing is that then you're starting to get to a sealed tent, and tents don't seal that well. So you kind of burn through a lot of CO2. But if you were to do a tent without CO2 and a tent with CO2, and you kept the levels, say 1,100 parts per million, and you just kept refilling your tank because it kind of goes away pretty fast, you will see significant results to the size of your plants, the amount of trichomes. You're just giving the plant more building blocks. If you have a high rate of air exchange with outside air, that is another way to bump your CO2 rates up. Or if you are in a basement near a furnace and you're pulling off of the floor, where the CO2 is heavier than air, it goes to the floor. That's why it's dangerous to use a lot of it in a commercial setting, because if someone passes out and then gets down into the foot or so of CO2, they might suffocate. But if you have a gas-powered furnace and you're pulling the air off of the floor in the room where the gas-powered furnace is, that's another way you can add CO2 to your grow that's free. Another way, people use those mushroom bags. I'm not a big fan of them. It's anecdotal. Totally, I can't say that I can stand by this scientifically or whatever. But sometimes I think those fungus bags that give off the CO2 might harbor some other bud rot sort of situations. And there's no real way to tell because I've never run one with, one without. And out on the West Coast where I was in the Northwest, there's all kinds of mold. So, but it just seems like there's a higher percentage of mold experience in tents that have those bags than don't. And the last you can do, essentially like baking soda and vinegar. You can do something along those lines. So I would say, Joel, that CO2 is incredibly important and you want it. It's just what's your level of commitment, both to the pain that it caused, not pain, the effort, and also possibly the cost. Because unless you can really seal up a tent, which is tough, you're going to be running through a lot of CO2. So I'd highly recommend it, though. You'd be like, wow, look what's happening here. There's a reason why commercial farms always run CO2 or mostly run CO2 indoors, because it just increases yields, it increases quality, and it's just handing the plant more blocks to play with. So definitely do that. So Mark, did I answer your question on foliar feeding? What was your specific question? You were just thinking about it. You were thinking about like you'd heard about it and you want to try it. Is there a specific problem you're trying to fix or something that is there a goal in mind? Because I sort of generally brushed over it, but I'm not sure that I actually helped you. So you got to tell me if I helped you. Oh, geez. That's inexcusable. Yawning. See, this is the other thing about podcasts. I could just edit that yawn right out. You guys wouldn't even know it happened. It'd be awesome. So there's that. I also listened to a podcast with Caleb from CSI Humboldt, and his deal is he does a lot of selfing of plants, and that's very interesting. When you self a plant, you're essentially creating a feminized plant. But let's see, all selfed plants are feminized plants, but not all feminized plants are selfed plants, because you could take the pollen from a selfed plant and apply it to a regular female, and that would be a feminized plant too. So when you self a plant, you're essentially doubling its genes, and then you can find out the makeup of that plant. So this guy's doing like bubblegum and granddaddy perps and chem dog and varieties like that he's selfing. And then when you get these packs of seeds, you can kind of find out what the constituents of these legendary strains are. And they're feminized, which means less males, which is good, but not great if you're looking for a male, obviously. The other problem with feminized seeds is sometimes feminizing or selfing, sometimes selfing a plant to itself creates, you double down on the problems it has, like say susceptibility to powdery mildew or hermaphrodism or one of the more negative qualities it has. You can reinforce that, and that may not be awesome. But essentially, you use a chemical like a silver or I think silver nitrate is what it is, or I think gibberellic acid that I was talking about earlier that you would soak seeds in. I think there's maybe a different version of it. Maybe it isn't that can work, that you spray on the plants, and essentially it blocks the ethyl production in the plant. And ethyl is what is the chemical that makes the female flowers turn female. So when you block that production using these methods, then the plant produces male flowers. But the reason they create feminized plants is because they have 2 X chromosomes and a Y. It's wild. Not every plant will take feminization or selfing. Some plants, when you do the feminization and selfing, it produces less pollen. It's kind of fascinating. And another sort of part of the future. Like if you get 10 seeds and you plant feminized plants, you're like 99% sure you're going to get 10 females. Whereas if they all come up, whereas normal seeds, you might get 7 males. It could happen. Um, I know people have been really mad. They paid $120 for a pack of seeds and they got 7 males. Well, you roll the dice, you take your chance, you know. So that's all part of the game. And another reason, all of these things is another reason I suggest you get some quality seeds, you plant them, you make clones of all of them, you run them and keep the clones alive over here, you harvest them, you sample them, you take detailed notes of the weights that you get off them, of any problems they have, and then at the end you make a decision which of these clones or 2 clones or whatever you're going to keep, and then run clones off of those because you know what you have. And then once you know what you have, you can also do things like start figuring out, I like to take this at 63 days. I like to take this at 74 days. You know, I've done it several times, and I tried it at one run. I did 55, 60, 65, 70, 75 days. I did 10 plants and took 2 each on that interval. And the 70 days was by far the best. And then the next time you don't even have to think about it because it's a clone and you have the same environment ideally. Then instead of the guessing and like, is it ready? Is this, well, I've already done this. I know it's around 70 days, and then I can use my visual cues. How does it smell? How does it look? Are the pistils mostly desiccated? Is the bud swelling? Are the trichomes turning milky or amber? In a uniform way across the plant, not in little patches here and there. So that's, I've talked about that before. You pheno-hunt a clone, you keep your mother alive, you use that clone, you grow that until you are great at growing that one phenotype of that one variety, and then start adding more variety if you truly want to get good at growing. And the other thing is to do side by side, change one thing at a time. Plants in the same pots and the same this, except I didn't put frass in these 2 pots and I did put frass in these 2 pots. And I did the same thing as a pheno hunt. I took detailed notes. I, in the end, tested them side by side. I weighed them. I figured it out. And I was like, is it worth the expense and trouble to put frass in this pot? And the answer is either yes or no. And then and then the next time you grow, you know if that works or not. But if you change soil every time, if you change lights, if you change your variety, which is the craziest thing, because these plants can take radically different, inputs. They like different temperatures. They can just all that. If you're changing what you're growing each time, it's much more complex. Not to say you can't do that. Some people love that. Some people love the fact that they're like, oh, I'm going to see what's going on here. And they plant new seeds every time. And then they're just like, oh, that one was a heavy feeder. And that was this and that was that. But you're never going to get the highest quality cannabis you can grow by starting new seeds that you've never tried before every time. You really need to work with 1, 2, 3 varieties depending on your space. I've seen commercial farms. I saw a 90,000 square foot facility commercial farm that they had like 150 moms. But they're a commercial farm where they have standard operating procedure and they have, they have complex environmental control, and they have people working 8 hours a day on this stuff. And so they can afford to run through all this. But as a grower, if you're growing for your own medicine, your own recreational, you kind of want to nail what you're doing, because it takes a lot of time and effort. And then once you have gotten pretty good at a few different varieties that are different kinds of plants, then you can start throwing some variety in there and figuring it out. But just most people who do this tend to do it for a long time, if not the rest of their life. So try to build your knowledge each time by knowing what you're doing. And you know what you're doing by, like I said, cloning, growing the same thing over, and doing side-by-side tests with these things. That's the best way. But the best thing about cannabis is that you don't have to follow any of this advice. You can do whatever you want, and you'll probably get some good bud out of it. It's just like the quantity is, are you going to get this a large enough quantity? Are you going to get the quality that you want consistently? And consistent is the word. You've got to do consistent things to get consistent quality. And so I highly recommend that you don't try different seeds all the time. I know some people have been growing for 30 or 40 years and they don't even care. They'll just throw whatever and just grow it. But they've seen enough that they can be like, oh, I can already tell this one's like hungry for nitrogen. I'm going to bump up just this varieties of nitrogen, but not for the rest of them because I don't want to burn them, So, but again, the beautiful thing about cannabis is do it your way. Figure it out. All these things I'm saying, I'm just telling you what my experience is. I'm just telling you how I've gone through this. But I definitely am not trying to tell you how to do it. I'm trying to give you advice on what I've learned, and I hope you can understand that distinction. I want to help, but I don't want to piss in your Cheerios. Like if you want to grow, feminized auto Gorilla Glue number fours, go for it. See what you can do with that. See how it works out. And then learn from it so that you can build your knowledge over time. And then when you've been growing for 20 or 30 years, you really have a good handle on how it all works. So I'm going to read this. Okay, so Mark asked me a question, and I hear this question kind of a lot. Should I remove big fan leaves that are blocking light to growing tips? Tuck them under. I'm in week 1 of flower and just set up my trellis. I think that you should only remove large fan leaves if they themselves are not getting light. Otherwise, tuck them or kind of get them out of the way and let your tips come through. But if you have a large fan leaf in full light, it is pulling in an incredible amount of radiation and turning that with chlorophyll into energy for the plant. If you cut all those off, and there's some people that totally defoliate their plants. I like to say, I want to create an environment in the plant where every part of the plant is receiving the same amount of light. And so if that big fan leaf is shading another fan leaf down lower, take the down lower fan leaf off. That's not getting any light. But don't take the big solar panels. And that is definitely, you're saying you're setting up a trellis, tucking those under and letting the rest of the plant grow up above it is a good idea because then your big fan leaves catch all the residual light that's not hitting the buds directly. But I think you want to walk a fine balance there. A lot of people wait till the 2nd or 3rd week to defoliate at all for flowering. Basically, you do a defoliation about a week before you flower, and then day 21 is what I've heard a lot. Day 14 or day 21, you do a fairly heavy defoliation at that point, and then you let it ride till the end. In my opinion, some people I selectively take if leaves are damaged, say more than 15 or 20% of the leaf is damaged, I remove it. If there are branches down low that are getting no light, I remove those. If there are large fan leaves down below, especially close to the soil, that aren't getting light, I remove those because that's a great place for vectors, insects, and microbes that are not good to establish themselves. And so I like to create a sort of a bubble of flowers and leaves, and then in the middle around the stem all the way down to the soil, I clear it out because there's no light getting there, and all that is shelter for bad things. Some people would say, oh, that's also the shelter for my predator insects. Predator insects are a whole other ball of wax. I mean, I talked about them briefly with banker plants, but they're great, but you have to kind of grow to encourage the predator insects, and that's a whole nother level of complexity that you add to it. So I wouldn't suggest that for the very, very newest people. But you got to do something for bugs. You got to do some kind of integrated plant management or pest management, IPM. I think it should be IVM, integrated vector management, because we're worried about viruses, we're worried about bacteria, we're worried about funguses, we're worried about pests, living insects. But I guess on that note too, never use a pair of scissors on two separate plants without dunking it in alcohol or some kind of disinfectant, because we're starting to see more viruses, and those viruses tend to spread by mechanical means. So that can mean thrips, because thrips actually penetrate the plant stems. Thrips aren't that bad; they're just kind of like stupid flying stupid flying insects that fly around and buzz in your face. But they actually slice into the stems of the plants, and they can open up places where viruses can get in there. And interestingly enough, scissors are one of the biggest mechanical vector spreaders of viruses. So make sure you are cleaning your scissors when you're trimming out your plants between plants. You don't want to, if one plant gets a virus, you don't want to spread it by scissors, which I think I did in California last year, because I was outdoors, I was going for it, I was doing a bunch of different plants, and then this thing went through my plants that I hadn't seen before, and I'm pretty sure it was the hop latent virus. I think it's called the hop latent virus, which is a bummer. It causes dudding, which is it's like your plants just don't. Some will die, and some just kind of don't produce. And it might not have been my fault. It was out of my hands at the beginning of the growth, so that virus might have come in early or whatever. But now I'm would be much more cautious using my scissors. So that is that. I am sort of running out of steam tonight. I didn't sleep the last couple. Man, I'm just a wussy. You guys get to hear about all my problems. Oh, my aching back. Oh, my neck. No, but I'm kind of running out of steam here. I really encourage people to send me questions. If you want to have conversations on IM or t4toby@gmail.com. That's the letter T, the number 4, and toby@gmail.com is my email address. I really like to have conversations about this stuff. More specific questions I can help you with. And again, I don't know everything. The amount I don't know dwarfs the amount that I know, but I've learned some things over the years, and if I can help you be successful, then that makes me happy, to be 100% honest. Lots of people out there with lots of opinions, because there's lots of different ways to grow cannabis. That's the thing that I know more than anything, is that there's a ton of information. And so pick one way and do it, and go with it until you either decide that it's not working, or until you refine it to the point that you know it's working great. That's the best advice I can give. Yeah, we got Nicholas coming up after this. I don't know what he's talking about tonight. He always has some kind of theme or whatever. He's a little more pointed than me, a little more focused than I am. So he's coming up after this. I appreciate you all. I'm going to try to get this podcast thing going, maybe even get like stickers and t-shirts, because I don't know. That's what we do these days. We try to figure that sort of stuff out. Just mainly so I can have t-shirts myself. If anyone else wants them, that'd be cool too. I appreciate you all very much. Many thanks to Ricky and Rachel for doing so much for this page. And it's good to see Joel. Mark, thanks for showing up. I guess there's a couple others. Martha, I am feeling better. I didn't see that earlier. Jesse, I'm not sure what you were talking about. I missed that. Oh, I'm terrible. Steven, nice to see you. I think that's elevate. There's something going on in St. Louis that's relative to. I should really know more. But thanks all for very much. I'm going to let you go for this week. Hit me up on IM or at my email. Get a hold of me. Let's talk about flowers. And I hope you all have a wonderful night, and be safe. Peace.